Okay, good afternoon and welcome. Thank you for joining our webinar, State of Payments for Utilities. My name is Lisa Hazergi and I'm a Director of Marketing here at Doxim and your host for today. Before we begin, I'd like to remind everyone that all attendees will be in listen-only mode. So if you have questions, please submit them via the Q&A section on the bottom of your screen. And if time permits, our speakers will be happy to answer them for you. You'll also receive an email link to the recording of the webinar, and we encourage you to share it with your colleagues who couldn't attend today. Now I'll pass things over to Erin Romo, Vice President of our Utilities Vertical here at Doxim, and she will get us started.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Lisa. As Lisa mentioned, I'm Erin Romo from Doxim. I am the Vice President of the Utilities Vertical here. And I just wanted to thank everybody for coming today and giving of your time. As you know, utilities are faced with fast-changing customer expectations, and it's never been more important than today to keep up with those expectations of your customers. And really now is the perfect time for our utilities to really evaluate the steps that you're taking to satisfy those customer expectations. So hopefully you'll find today's state of payments for utilities and some trends that we're seeing in customer engagement, and hopefully it appeals to you. You can next slide. So let me just introduce a couple Doxim before we get started. We are a premier customer communications and payment provider that offers utilities purpose-built solutions that will enhance your customer experience strategy. Some of you may be more familiar with some of Doxim's recent acquisitions. In September of 2019, Doxim acquired Utilitech, who is a utilities-focused customer communications and payment provider. And then in September of 2020, Doxim acquired Striata, which allowed us to expand our digital delivery solutions for utilities to help promote that digital interaction with your customers. And then in October of 2020, Doxim acquired Pinnacle Data Systems, who helped us expand our print and mail footprint across the United States. And then again, in March of this year, Doxim acquired Level One, which was also a utility-focused customer communication and payment provider. So now together, being one company at Doxim, we can offer and bring stronger solutions specific to the utility industry and enhance how you communicate with your customers. Next slide. And then real quickly, this is just an example, a representation of the solutions that we offer our utility clients. As you can see, we are a full service customer communication and payment provider, and our solutions were built specifically for utilities and seek to help utilities improve your service, increase your collections, and engage your customers. So, if we can move on to the next slide. And then, because I want to get to the good part here, which is really our experts here from JP Morgan Chase, which we have David Mallow and Paul Sammer. I hope you enjoy what they're going to share with us today. And I'm going to let you guys take it away.
Well, hey, thanks so much. So I was moving my family to a new home somewhat recently, and I got all my utilities set up. I turned off the physical bills and I got online into the portal and just got everything set up. So I wait a few weeks and then I get my first bill in my email. I click on the link, I sign into the portal, and I'm all ready to set up automatic payments, pay my first bill. I've got my routing number, my checking account ready, and I'm asked to input my utility account number. And I think, oh, well, all right, I'll find it on this website. So I'm looking on the website, I can't find it. And I think, oh, all right, it's got to be on my bill, or it's got to be on my first sign-up statement that I got sometime last month. I'll just find that. I'm going to stop thinking about this right now. So a few weeks go by, and then I think, oh, I got to pay this bill. So I rummage through all my stuff, looking for this account setup statement, this very first physical copy that I had received, trying to find my account number for this utility. I can't find it anywhere. I spend 15 minutes doing this. I think I'm just gonna I'm not even want to think about this right now. A few more weeks passed by, and I think I've finally just got to pay this thing. So I find the right number to call up, give the customer service representative my card information, and then ask them to start sending me physical bills again so that I can go back for another step and get my automatic payment set up. Okay, so in the context of moving into a home, this is not the biggest headache, but it was still just a little bit of a frustration when you're trying to set something up. And I think this kind of an experience is a little bit of indicative of where the utilities industry right now, where it is right now. And this was one of the largest utilities on the East Coast, by the way. So with that as sort of as a background, we'll talk today about what's happening in the utility space and some of the really big frictions that are still in utilities payments, and some of the solutions to think about next steps as the industry and payments are evolving. So let's just start with a very wide aperture and think about what's happening in payments overall, not necessarily just in utilities, overall payments. And the trajectory of payments over the next several years is driven, as Aaron mentioned, by consumer expectations. And consumer expectations today are completely different than they were 15, 10, even 5 years ago. It's just expected now that in commercial experiences, the payment process, the whole experience is going to be on demand, instant, seamless. And consumers are starting to even expect that payments and commerce can be made wherever they are, not even in front of a screen. And all of this is wrapped up around expectations for security with one's data, and ensuring that your identification is protected. Merchants are responding to these expectations in a few ways, depending on their size, their segment, industry, other factors. At a very basic level, a merchant might just turn on a payment method. At another degree of complexity, you start to see things like all of the innovation that we've participated in as consumers in the past 2 years, things like curbside collect and buy online, pick up in store. And at the most robust level, some very large merchants, you think about companies like Starbucks or Netflix or Amazon, these companies that are approaching payments as a key part of their strategy. Now, for merchants, payments are all about the incremental customer and the incremental sale. And for utilities, you've already got the customer. What you're focused on is a reduction in accounts receivable, encouraging bill recipients to pay on time as fast as possible. So with that as a backdrop, let's look at how we think about utilities payments. And one of the key ways that we think about payments in the utility sector is just the number of frictions that still exist in many channels. And a reduction in these frictions, there's several of them listed on the right side of the page, but a reduction in these frictions can result in two really big advantages. One is that we can incentivize, encourage billing customers that currently pay with manual methods to start getting online, maybe paying through an online portal. For customers that currently pay through digital channels, how can we encourage those customers to start making automatic payments and make the payment just easier and frictionless so people don't even have to think about it? So that's one big advantage. The other advantage to thinking about all these frictions in specific channels is that we can start tackling ways to make payments within the consumer's preferred channel as easy as possible. So for instance, we're always going to have customers that prefer manual payments, in-person payments, cash, and other methods of payment. How can we make that payment experience as frictionless and easy as possible so that when it comes time to pay, it's not a headache that somebody has to think about. It's just a natural part of everyday commerce and as easy as any other sort of commercial experience. So we've got some of the big frictions listed on the right, but some of the big ones that we think about are what sort of method of payment is available? Are we meeting customers' expectations for their preferred payment method? Are we meeting their expectations for specific channels that they prefer to use? That's text or email or web or whatever it is. Another very big friction that we still see in many cases is that the user experience it's in the process of being enhanced and upgraded across online channels, but especially for mobile experiences as consumers increasingly gravitate to mobile payments and mobile commerce. But there's many more here, and we'll talk about these frictions in the context of the channels as we go through the rest of this presentation.
I wanted to, Paul.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yep. Go ahead, Dave.
Thank you. What a real quick thing, and likely something Aaron's about to add to the last slide you just were on, Paul, that it's very, very important to point out is this helps to represent an entire processing environment in activating every channel you can think of from a payment acceptance perspective. Manual payments, digital, automatic. When you think about the steps you could take to enter into payment acceptance or enhancing your payment acceptance is which one of these are you doing? Which one of these can you do? And then what's your strategy to address the others in the future? So it's not necessarily about activating all of these day one or trying to remove every friction day one. It's just what's the overall payment strategy to addressing these frictions. It's probably the biggest piece that I see a lot of organizations lose sight of because it can seem like a lot to take on at first. But if you just look at what's your overall payment strategy to address these items and where you can and when you can, we'll definitely get you on the right footing going forward. Sorry, Aaron, back to you.
No, that's great. Much smarter than what I was going to say. So thank you for that. But no, I was going to say something very similar. It seems overwhelming to have to look at all of these friction points, and you can make a huge amount of difference with reducing some very small friction points. The scenario that Paul mentioned when we first started the call, that was a huge friction point for him as a consumer. And I'm sure that he's not the only one in this world who's ever experienced that with trying to pay their utility bill or any bill just in general. So how do you make it more accessible for your customers? Really, that's really where you're wanting to look. How can we save payment methods to make it simpler for your customer while still keeping security top of mind and being able to offer those additional channels? And reduce those frictions slightly while still keeping your security on point.
Exactly. David and Aaron, nail on the head. Before we go into some specific channels, I want to just see what sort of bills do customers say I've got to pay right now, and which ones do they hold off on paying if they have to? So according to this survey, the good news for electricity providers is that you're pretty far at the top. For natural gas and for water providers, these consumers say that these types of bills are ones that they might push to a later date if they need to. And this is important because not only has competition in many markets for many utilities increased over the past few decades, but now you're not just to actually get the payment, you're competing with all of these other providers. You're competing with the customer's bank and mortgage and their phone bill and their car bill. And so any sort of effort and any kind of reduction in those frictions to make it that much easier for the consumer to make a payment, it can have an impact, especially for instances when a consumer might be constrained and thinking about holding off on making a bill payment. Let's take a quick look and just start off at the top of that ladder on the previous page. Let's just start off with automatic payments. And utilities have been really the envy of many brands and retailers and merchants that have looked to utilities and wish they had the kinds of recurring revenue streams that a utility does. But one of the big trends in payments overall has been more direct to consumer and subscription and recurring revenue types of business models to be able to capture that recurring revenue. And what these companies have found is that when there's greater payment flexibility in a subscription model, in a recurring revenue model, they see more growth. And that's what the graph on the left side shows, is that companies that have customers that actually make changes in their subscription billing see higher growth compared to companies that are inflexible. And customers are looking for things like the ability to make a partial payment or just some additional flexibility around the automatic payments. And there's some best practices on this page on the right. With digital payments, there's been a major acceleration during COVID as consumers quite understandably have not wanted to expose themselves and decided that they'd give digital payments a try. And we expect that digital payments are going to continue to be popular because when we ask consumers about their purchasing behavior and their new ways of engaging in commerce, they say that they enjoy getting online and paying for things, and that they expect to continue to pay online. And that could be for things like paying a bill, and it could be for things like curbside collect and buying groceries online. And that's what the data suggests, which is that customers are just saying, hey, we really are using digital channels to pay much more frequently now than pre-COVID. And when we ask consumers about this behavior, they're getting online to replace the whole bill process. So they want to find information about their bill. They're turning to online channels as the first source to do that, to get information about when transactions are going to occur and funds are going to be withdrawn, and then to make payments. So Broadridge, which tracks this, expects that by the end of this year, there's going to be a big increase in consumers' responses for why they get online and their willingness to get online to make bill payments. So Broadridge also has said that when they talk to consumers, they say that 75% of consumers in the next year are expecting to convert at least one bill payment to a digital channel. That's up from somewhere in the mid-60s just a year ago. So we'll be seeing more and more consumers getting online to make payments. Here's some data about the several different types of digital channels that consumers are leveraging to make payments. Biller websites are always going to be popular, going directly to the biller. Bank websites remain popular. There's also been an increase in mobile experiences because consumers are doing everything on their phone and increasingly turning to mobile for all kinds of online transactions. When we look at e-commerce data, we see that mobile commerce is getting to be around a third of all transactions, and it's the it's what consumers prefer. So you can see some of the data in the middle on mobile experiences. Third-party websites are also a big one, and new ways to pay, new channels like text messages and virtual voice assistants that weren't as popular in around 3 or 4 years ago, now are emerging, and these kinds of channels are going to be more popular, especially as consumers get used to paying for other things via text and paying for things through their smart devices and through voice assistants. Now, in the retail space, if we pull back from just utilities and think about payments overall, consumers are asked about reasons why they abandon their carts online. And a notable reason is that they say that they don't trust the site with their credit card information, which is maybe to a degree surprising, because the consumer was already online looking for items. Presumably, they were prepared to make a payment, but likely they were looking for another way to pay, maybe a digital wallet, where they wouldn't have to input sensitive card information, and to be reassured that they just didn't have to potentially expose that data. So cards remain an issue with a subset of customers that need to make a payment online. Just an important point for utilities to keep in mind as you're thinking about your own payment strategy. Just a little bit more on digital wallets and what we've seen with digital wallets. At the top, these graphs show digital wallet awareness among consumers that purchase goods online. So if you purchase goods online, there's about a little bit more north of a 50% chance that you'll be aware of Apple Pay, about a 50% chance that you'll be aware of Google Pay. And to some degree, it's a little surprising that consumers, according to our data provider for this, which is ComScore, a little bit surprising that now, as we're even approaching a decade later, a substantial number of consumers haven't heard of these ways to pay. However, on the bottom, we show some trends as far as actual usage. So consumers that are aware of digital wallets are increasingly saying that they're using Apple Pay and using Google Pay online. And for the longest time, we saw very incremental increases quarter to quarter, very slight increases up until, as you can see in the graphs, up until just about the third quarter of 2020, when there was a big spike that took place.
And one point I would add, Paul, on that item, it's really interesting when we think about our consumer lives. I think all of us on this webinar can probably understand what tokenization, what encryption is, the importance of masking credit card data in environments, especially online. If you were to ask my father, my mother-in-law, father-in-law, they would have no idea what any of those words were, and thought I was trying to confuse them. So where I see a lot of these advancing is over the last couple of years, and especially with COVID, more and more consumers are actually starting to understand that these digital wallets actually protect them. I think it behooves just COVID experience, the convenience of them, but also I think it's some of these wallets are starting to understand that consumers are worried about security, and if they can find ways to educate them on how to protect their credit card information by using their payment method, then it's going to drive adoption, and people are going to feel more comfortable with Apple holding onto their data. And then if they go buy at a bunch of places, they're never really giving those merchants a clear card number. So I think it definitely touches on what Paul showed a couple slides ago, that still security plays a big part in it. Convenience is huge, but the more and more consumers understand that these digital wallets protect them greater than other things, I think it'll just drive adoption exponentially.
Yeah, great point. I mean, the tech companies have certainly been messaging the strength and the security of these ways to pay.
Mhm.
Here's a little bit more on an emerging trend that as consumers we're all getting used to. This is the contextual experience and the contextual payments, which just means shopping in the moment. And it can mean shopping through any of these form factors that are listed on the page. Things like smart appliances and smart speakers, in-vehicle payments and wearables and social networks, where there's a ton of development and investment in social networks. And this is certainly still emerging, and this isn't something that necessarily has to be on every utility's radar right now as something to implement, but it's worth watching and paying attention to, because especially as consumers get used to these new ways to pay, which often are more voice-based. I like to show one example of a company that's thought very deeply about these kinds of contextual experiences, and that's Domino's, Domino's Pizza. So Domino's has their approach to payments, their anywhere approach to payments in contextual channels. And each of those form factors on the previous page, in each of those form factors, Domino's has some way, in some way that they're connecting to a potential customer. They're in the Samsung Smart TV, in Ford Sync cars for in-car payments. They've integrated into Google and Alexa, into smartwatch integrations, in tons of social networks and online tools. And it's been a big part of their strategy to very conscientiously reduce frictions as much as possible, so that from the moment a consumer thinks, oh, it'd be nice to have a pizza, it's as easy as possible for them to translate that thought into a physical pizza at their door. And we've got Domino's stock price on the left side of this page. Now, we're not ascribing all of this growth to the approach to payments that Domino's has taken, certainly not, but it's a piece of the overall reinvention that Domino's has prioritized since the beginning part of the last decade.
So Paula, this is an interesting study, and I think that we can kind of take note of, right? Like you said, nobody has to come follow in every single channel that Domino's did, but I think it's a nice example of how a company really focused on how to connect to their customers in the ways that their customers might want to connect to them when it occurs to them. And I think that's where we're seeing the technological advantages in this world, the digitization as we move forward. If I'm driving in my car, obviously I'm driving in my car and I'm thinking of what's my, when is my utility bill due? Because I'm not set up on automatic payments. I bet you there's a subset of customers who would love to be able to say, hey, Ford Sync, remind me what my utility bill due date is and how much I owe. Right? It's not something to require, but it's something that you can use to help your customers stay connected.
Yeah, exactly.
And I had a funny one I shared with Paul the other day, and it's directly to Domino's, but directly to your point as well about engagement and reminders. It's 3 months ago, I started my daughter 1.5 years in swim class, and every Thursday, I don't cook dinner, neither does the wife, so we order Domino's pizza. And we did it for about a month straight. Every Thursday, we would click the order button. They save my payment credentials, so super easy checkout. Everything on this slide is accurate. And then I noticed probably after a couple of weeks of doing that every Thursday, even if we skipped swim class, Domino's would remind me that they were ready to send me a pizza on 5 o'clock on a Thursday. So it's interesting, like they have all these avenues to take payments, but just that simple reminder of, hey, we're here. Maybe I wasn't going to order a pizza that day. Maybe we were trying to do something different, but I was directed to them because I remembered the week prior. So it's just interesting, that level of engagement that helps to drive us consumers to do things that maybe we weren't thinking of at the time. Very subtle, but it works and it's effective.
Right. Oh, most definitely. And I think a lot of providers, utilities, any provider that are out there tend to get into a set it and forget it mode, and that the customers want to be in that mode as well. And I think that they do, but there is a bit of that reach out and remind me about certain things. Like for a utility, even if I'm on auto pay, maybe you should just remind me that auto pay payment is coming out, a couple days before. Just how do I make my life easier by using communication and interaction?
Exactly. That speaks to just because a customer has signed up for a channel doesn't mean that for the best channel for the utility doesn't mean that that there's no way to further improve the experience. And you can imagine there's customers out there that say, I got this automatic payment. I keep forgetting when it happens. I'm just going to go back to paying manually or paying online. So that's a great point. There's also, let's take a look at the last rung of the ladder in our framework on manual payments. And one of the ways that there's always going to be a segment of customers that prefer to pay with cash. Now, they either prefer it for budgeting reasons, or because it could be they just don't have access to a financial system to be able to pay with online methods of payment. Now, in that latter example, there's fewer and fewer households that are considered underbanked and unbanked each year. So here's on the left side of this page, the Federal Reserve tracks the percentage of households that are unbanked. And there's a product for every demographic, every group out there. The percentage of unbanked is going to continue to decrease, decrease over time. Now, for customers, for the unbanked, for those who just prefer the convenience of cash, if they're out shopping and they like paying with cash, there are networks, retail networks that are available, so that if you're at Walmart or Kroger or other participating retailers, it's easy for you to also make a bill payment as you're shopping for other things. So on the right side of this payment, we've got some data on check-free pay. They've got 30,000 retail locations, do a bunch of transactions annually. And some companies like property management software, RealPage, that have used services like check-free pay have described how a very substantial proportion of their overall cash payments are made through networks like this one. It's just very convenient.
Well, just to kind of touch a little bit more on that, I think as we've gone through, the COVID and everything that we've gone through as a world, really this last couple of years, what we saw is that we saw an emergence of this payment channel actually with some of the utilities. And it saw that major change when the utilities had to close their service centers, right? And there was quite a long period of time where utilities were closing their service centers. We couldn't have people coming in. So how do you capture that payment? Because these are people who generally make it a habit. Maybe they're in the city and there's one payment center, to go to for the utility. And because they stopped coming into work and everybody went remote, that avenue kind of closed up. So we saw an emergence of people being able to use it as another avenue because they needed, and it's not just underbanked, it's people who want to budget or who are living in a more of a paycheck to paycheck type of reality, which again, we have seen an increase of over the last year and a half, where there are people who never had to struggle with paying utility bills and they're wondering, how am I going to stretch my dollar this month? We did see a huge uptick in that just by making things accessible to the customers and bringing in the payment locations to them, closer to them, rather than having them come to you.
Yep, exactly. just as we're wrapping up here, a little bit on kiosks. Now, customers are using kiosks much more frequently now, not just in utilities, but across several different types of payments experiences. You know, it seems like kiosks have popped up very quickly across QSRs. If you want to go in and pick up a hamburger, there's a good chance that you'll be ordering through a kiosk today. So consumers are just getting more familiar with how to interact with the kiosk. Now, I've seen examples of some frustration with this, where in airports where these can be a little bit confusing for a segment of the population. But over time, it just becomes much more easier to make a payment in a kiosk, as you have more places where you make those kinds of payments, QSRs and other kinds of environments. And there's just a lot of benefits that come from kiosks. Not from the consumer experience, not having to wait in line if there's a backup, potentially being able to pay a bill in off hours, not having to go into a store. If you've got a standalone kiosk that maybe doesn't even have to be at a central location, it just makes a lot of sense as a great way to enhance the consumer experience.
Yeah, that's just one more point about that. Huge way to enhance the customer experience, but also a big way for utilities to help reduce their costs. As we know, again, because of the situation that we're in the industry today with employment, even, it's difficult to get people a lot of people to work. So if you are struggling to find, CSRs or tellers, people to actually work with your customers, sometimes you can put in a kiosk to help reduce that volume of people. And to help stretch out your staff a little bit better. So again, kiosks are useful in a number of different ways. And again, what we're seeing is helping because there is a labor shortage right now.
Right, exactly. Try hiring for anything, and
exactly.
It's tough. Just a last point on manual payments is that customers are also looking for their preferred way to pay in person as well. And one of the emerging ways to pay in the past just 3 or 4 years is contactless cards. Now, contactless has been very popular globally for a long time. In some markets overseas, like 80-90% of eligible transactions will be on a contactless card, and we're just seeing pretty big increases in the U.S. now year over year, and customers are looking for places to use contactless cards as they really like the experience. So to sum up, I think what's next for utilities payments, some of the big themes is that we're going to see ongoing growth of mobile channels and a lot of investment in those channels, given that is increasingly the way that consumers want to interact with all kinds of organizations through their phone or mobile device. Kiosks are going to continue to automate the in-person acceptance process. The user experience, there's still a good ways to go. As I was talking about at the beginning of the presentation, there's still a ways to go with the user experience in several instances. And text and voice and these emerging ways to pay are going to supplement other existing and popular channels. And just lastly, utilities payments are going to be as seamless and as easy, and it's just going to be expected that they're as easy as any other kind of payment. We're rapidly approaching that direction, and there's just a ton of opportunities in the utilities industry to make payments easier, to accelerate your billing to cash cycle, reduce accounts receivables, lower costs, all kinds of advantages that come through a robust approach to thinking about payments and the consumer experience around payments. So just and one last point, it doesn't have to be, as we were talking about earlier, it doesn't have to be everything that we had showed on that first page and all of the frictions. We can tackle this in whatever way makes sense for the utility, whatever stage you're at. Thinking about payments can be somewhat daunting given all of the developments that are happening, but even just taking a step can have some real impacts.
Yeah, I would just add on to that. As you said, Paul, it's important to have the strategy, and this is specific to utility vertical. It's specific to every merchant accepting payments from a consumer, and all retailers that we deal with in our consumer lives all have payment strategies built around this. The bigger you get, the bigger the payment strategy, but definitely a term used way more now than it was a decade ago. A decade ago was just, are you accepting payments? And that was enough to answer yes or no. Now it's what is your payment strategy is the question that we'll ask organizations at all levels to see where they're headed for the future. So just having that alone will put you in a great place to be successful.
Most definitely. Well, thank you both, David and Paul, for this great presentation. We hope that the audience found this informative, and we appreciate your time. We do have some time for question and answers if anybody is curious about anything.
Yeah, so the floor is open. If you would like to submit a question for our speakers, you can go ahead and click on the Q&A box. Looks like we may be getting some in here. So one attendee says, curious about fatigue and over communication.
Yeah. So as far as payments, hey, you've got a payment coming up, and sort of over notifying. It sounds like, yeah. I mean, hey,
over communication. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. There's a balance. There's a balance, and you want to make if you do, whenever you're communicating with the customer, it's really important to make sure that they've got just very easy ways of turning off or on that communications channel. So, almost every text that I get from a company, there's some sort of option to stop receiving those texts.
You can also think about it from who you're sending those communications to. It can be strategic in those rates. Are you trying to get someone to pay that maybe doesn't pay on time all the time and is bouncing around? So there could be a thought of over communicate when you need to, but maybe don't over communicate to someone that you shouldn't. So definitely a balancing act with that, but maybe it's more a strategy would be, don't look at it in such a general sense. Look at it as, if you can you whittle it down to the people you want to communicate to for whatever reason. But there definitely is a such thing as fatigue, even Zoom fatigue.
Yeah, and to add on to that, I think some of the things that we focus on at Doxim with the customer interaction and the preference center is separating out preferences and how your consumers want to communicate with you, in which channel, for what types of communication, right? So it's really important to spread out and separate out that communication. You want to be able to separate out your billing communications from your marketing and announcement type of communications. And maybe your consumers would like to receive notifications about all their billing events via text message, but they don't want to be bothered by that via marketing events. So again, giving them more channels will allow your customers to not get that fatigue as much, because they can then control how they're communicating, how they're being communicated with.
Great. I think a follow-up question to that is, what tool do you use to monitor frequency? So I think that's relating to communications.
Yes. So most of the frequency communications are surrounding with the billing. With Doxim, we offer up to like 3 communications around the billing for example, and then it's up to the utility on working with us and determining their cadence of events for the marketing and other communication channels. And if we're handling that that delivery, then we can offer the reports that say, you know, which campaigns went out to which consumers at once. You don't want to hit every consumer every single month with the same message. And maybe you could, there's ways that you can address separate subsets of audiences. And again, if we're providing those communications, we can provide reports and the campaign results of those.
Hopefully that was helpful. Thank you, Erin. Another question, is electronic check acceptance still part of a consumer's go-to, or are stats showing that card is the preferred way to pay?
I'd say it depends on the vertical. I'd say we are seeing card, if we're looking obviously utility specifically, people are prone to continue to use check in this environment because that's just what they've always done. There's a consumer kind of ideology behind, I'm used to making a payment using this credential, so I'm going to continue to do that going forward. Rewards fever is definitely heightened and is pushing more and more and more payments to rewards type cards. If you ask myself, my wife, anyone in the household, rewards cards are where we always fall to if it's an option. But you'd be surprised at the amount of consumers that just still today don't think that way. They're paying their bill with a debit card when they could pay it with a check. And the cost on the back end of that is less from a merchant services perspective. So definitely in the utility space, not as of a decline as you would see it in a more retail type environment to where check is all but gone. In this vertical, I would see it still maintaining, and then it's just making both options available, as we discussed in the webinar, having digital wallets, having credit card, having all types of different payment functionality available gives you your consumer that option to pay whatever means they feel comfortable paying it.
David, another question. Smart solutions are getting bigger, especially for electric and water utilities. What trends are you aware of? Water utilities specifically, if you can, who are providing apps that include not only faster ways to pay, conservation recommendations, and ways to push communications anywhere from bills being due to boil advisories. And is Doxim partnering with any of these platforms? Thinking specifically of companies like WaterSmart that might partner with third-party payment providers like Paymentus.
So I can take a stab at this one. So Doxim does partner with companies. WaterSmart is one of the companies that we partner with. We do have some integrations that are already in place with companies with WaterSmart and other companies like them. We are also pulling in and taking these types of requests and trends in the utility industry and starting to add that onto where we can onto our end solution as well. It's really about expanding that customer communication base, how you want to display the information and where you want to display it. So we do partner with any company. We have a couple of partnerships that are already in place, and we are looking to build those options in our solution as we move forward. Hopefully that answered your question.
Thank you, Erin. Another question here. What are some of the immediate concrete steps that utilities can take, especially those just starting to think about enhancing the payment experience?
I would go back, and I know I've said this a couple of different times, immediate steps, assess exactly how you're taking payments today and determine from a cost and ROI perspective, what would be the next best thing to turn on. So if today you're only taking manual payments and you're having everyone come in to make that payment in person, it's how do I engage this clients that are making these manual payments to go digital? Because it's going to be cheaper for me. I don't have to staff as often. I can maybe reduce my workforce from taking payments. So it's things of that nature. It's really reviewing your current payments environment and what would be the easiest to implement. And that's normally a manual payment environment. Converting that to a digital environment is usually the lowest cost and the most bang for your buck.
Yeah, that's a great point, David. The other thing I would mention is if we have seen an emergence in the last 5 years or so with a lot of digital payment platforms. So if you already have one that's in place and it's not as simple as I don't have one, I'm going to put it in play. Really addressing your gaps. So as Paul mentioned earlier in the presentation, what are those friction points that are stopping the customer from completing whatever action you want them to take on the website? Why would a customer stop the completion of their enrollment to your site, right? What would stop them from signing up for auto pay? What would stop them from making their payment online? Any of those friction points where you think, oh, I've identified where I could lose a customer, those would be your top points. And then as you get into and you've eased all your friction points, then really beefing up and marketing at the same time, budget and levelized billing, right? So your consumers, if they know what to expect for their bill, they're more likely to go on auto pay. It's the hesitation of what is my bill going to be this month? Because with utilities, they are changing because they're based on consumption. So I, as a consumer, need to take active participation in my utility, in my energy or water consumption. So how do I do those things, right? So it's really about sharing that information, really looking to see where your gaps are and addressing those, the stopping points, where your customers are falling off. And the thing I can think of is anybody who's used Google Analytics, you can kind of see on a website when people come in, what page they start to fall off on. And if people are falling off after the first page, you have to make some major updates to your website. So it's very similar to that. And this is an ever-changing and a reiterating process. You can't ever stop this process because the moment you stop it, you're already behind.
Great point, Erin. Thank you. I think we're at the getting towards the end of our time, and I believe that's all of the questions that we have received today. So again, we just want to thank everyone for your participation. Thank you for your valuable time that you spent with us. A reminder that we will be emailing all of you a link to the recording of the webinar. And if you have any follow-up questions, you want to chat with us about maybe some of Doxim solutions, we are more than happy to speak with you. So please don't hesitate to reach out, and we hope you all have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you.